Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar focusing on pharmaceutical sales in the COVID-19 period and beyond. It's a topic that seems to come up in almost every conversation these days, so very timely. Our sponsor for today is Diligent Health Solutions. Diligent is an outsource provider of both commercial as well as medical affairs solutions to the life science industry. And they have a breadth of offerings. A few that are particularly relevant to our conversation today include the alternative selling models of both inside sales teams as well as hybrid sales teams. As for me, I'm Sandy Nichols. I'm an independent consultant, and I'm by no means a professional facilitator, but I've been in pharma for about 20 years now and have a whole lot of passion for how we can come out of this smarter and stronger together. So we have a great panel with us, and our plan is to cover three main topic areas. The first is what we've been seeing and experiencing in these COVID times relative to pharma specifically. Second, some of the strategies and tactics we've been employing. And finally, third, a few key thoughts for the future. So it is a lot to cover, but we'll be sure to save about 10 minutes for questions at the end, and you can feel free to send your questions in via the chat function at any time along the way. We'll collate them and synthesize them and have a good conversation about those questions in the last 10 minutes of our time here. So the reality is for all three of today's topics is that really nobody has all the answers, and there's an incredible amount to learn, and that's really our hope and intent for today, is to share and connect in ways that will help foster insights as well as positive change, both during COVID and hopefully beyond. So we can kick it off with our some introductions from our panelists, and we can go alphabetically. Andy, John, Kevin, Todd, can you share with us just a bit about yourselves and your background?
Sure. This is Andy Agello. I've been 30 plus years in the industry in sales and sales leadership roles, the majority of it with Novo Nordisk, and the last couple of years as in a role of a commercial excellence lead for a small rare disease oncology product in a company called Lexicon.
Thanks, Andy. Hey, everybody. I'm John Arena. Nice to be participating in this call with everyone. So I've been in the industry for 26 years and started at Eli Lilly and Company for 9 years at Johnson & Johnson, serving in a variety of sales and marketing and market access roles. And for the last 9 years, I've been with Lundbeck, and I serve as our U.S. Chief Commercial Officer.
Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Kevin O'Neill. I've been in the industry for about 25 years, started in big pharma, and then went to biotech, spent the last 15 years in specialty injectable space. Along the way, I've been in sales and sales management, marketing, and managed markets and market access. So I'm coming from a little bit different angle than the rest of my colleagues here. I'm very happy to be here.
Hi, everyone. Todd Horick, the Vice President of Marketing for Supernus Pharmaceuticals in my home state of Maryland. Been in the industry roughly 21 years, originally starting as a neuropharmacologist with the NIH before transitioning for the last 20 years into marketing. Originally started with Novartis Pharmaceuticals up in New Jersey. For the last decade, I've been with Supernus Pharmaceuticals as the first commercial employee nearly a decade ago. Time has flown by. Building out every commercial department with a lot of smart folks around here. And I'm happy to be here today.
Great. Thanks, gentlemen. It's great breadth and variety of experience you bring to bear. So let's put it to work and jump into our first topic. Can I ask you to share with us some of the unique things that you've been seeing and experiencing in your areas of pharma since the pandemic began?
Yeah, I think I'll kick that off, Sandy, just to talk about some of the interesting things that I've seen, that we've seen here at Supernus, based on really a few key variables, whether it's a mature product, a launch product, or biologic, frankly, in terms of how the dynamics are different within the pandemic that we're experiencing now. Some of the interesting dynamics we've seen, just for example, in the retail space with our chronic disorder products, is a change in how physicians are prescribing and a change in how physicians are taking or not taking their medications. patients are really determining for better or for worse what's necessary and what's not in terms of their medications. I think we've seen a lot of shift in terms of, in fact, a trend break in prescriptions and how they're being written around 90-day prescriptions, which is particularly interesting because you may see a trend decline actually in prescriptions while units and growth and revenue are either maintained or increasing. To that end, we're seeing higher doses being written for some of our chronic medications, and that really dovetails into some dynamics that we've observed with patients in terms of talking to patients, going to higher doses because they want to stay out of the hospital or stay out of the doctor's office. So more effective doses, so that balance in the ratio between effectiveness and tolerability in terms of what a patient's willing to accept has changed, which also leads into adherence. We're seeing quite a bit more adherence with products right now in the retail space. Again, patients don't want to move into the hospital for breakthroughs, for example. So an interesting change in some of the variables as we look at how our medications are being prescribed. On the flip side, some of our products, such as biologics, are having challenges right now where it requires healthcare practitioners or nurses to administer those products. We're seeing difficulties right now getting out into the field to assist our patients. So you can see just in those four dynamics, a real shift in how we might message, how we might market and sell our products in the midst of COVID. So it's not really a one-size-fits-all COVID plan, if you will, as Sandy had mentioned in the beginning of the webinar, the challenges. And I know we'll talk about launch products a little bit later, but I know, John, you had some great perspectives on sales force dynamic and disease state dynamics around telehealth, et cetera, that you might want to comment on.
Yeah, it's we see similar, Todd, to what you had shared as well. And I think looking across the portfolio, we see our broad specialty brands, especially those that we're investing in direct-to-consumer advertising, namely television and online TV, that are a little bit later in life cycle, have had more carryover business, more momentum, and they've been able to maintain a level of TRXs. New to brand share has been compromised, obviously, in light of the pandemic. We've also seen more 90-day script utilization as well. But the overall resiliency of mature brands and the importance to continue to invest in activating the consumer is something that's been observed within my organization. And then rare disease. Rare disease can be a bit different, especially if it's a biologic, infusible product, or any physician-administered product. What we're seeing is that has had more of a hit and or dynamic, partly because the patient flow and patient throughput into the offices are quite different due to the pandemic. And then also provider choice to start somebody new with a physician administered has also been a bit more of a challenge as well. So those are some dynamics across the portfolio. But I think the key learning for us is we've got to look at each brand independently, recognizing that when you have a portfolio, the dynamics within each disease state's different. Some specialists, like in psychiatry, have really embraced telehealth. Primary care, not as much. So how we reach and engage our call points is highly variable. So we have to take that kind of agile approach to really engaging each one of our brands. The other thing that we've learned is as we've scaled our virtual capabilities, it's required a tremendous amount of training for our folks. I mean, you'd think that, engaging in a promotional discussion, via Zoom or via Engage or even via telephone would be relatively straightforward, but it's you've got the technology dynamics in there. It's different, and we've learned that. So we've really taken key learnings from the folks that have done it the best and really tried to replicate that across the organization. Probably have invested more in that type of customer engagement training virtually than we would have initially thought we would have needed to. But that was a key learning that you can't train enough on making sure people are effective in this mean of communication. Is something that we've also learned throughout this whole piece. And then lastly is relationships. It almost reminds me of in the medical device world, relationships are so critically important. And if I'm going to launch a new knee replacement technology, I'm going to hire the best representative that's, calls on these orthopedic doctors in this geography, because I'll probably get 70% of those relationships. I'll come with the individual, and I'll be able to gain better uptake of the product. I think in the pharmaceutical space, this virtual element, from what we're learning, is folks that have good relationships are able to get people on virtual engagement calls. Folks that don't or aren't as familiar with their call points, it's much, much more difficult. So the relationships that people have invested in are really being playing off to be positive now. And folks that don't have the deeper relationships are struggling to get in front of folks with a level of frequency that's going to help influence their prescribing.
Yeah, I'll chime in here. This is Andy, and just something very unique during the pandemic that we've seen, again, in a small rare disease. I know you referred to, John, and 12,000 patients in a given year, is that we had very, very strong sales first quarter and even second quarter, 21% growth, and it had a lot to do with you had a more engaged patient audience. Remember, it's so small, but they're taking steps that are a little bit different. Like participating more in advocacy groups or meetings that they're part of, Facebook Live events. So we really laid out a plan on how can we engage this very, very interested audience, because they're home and they're able to be more interested about distractions. As well as an organization, I think in a smaller biotech, you have a commercial team that can really lean into each other. And if you all have that same approach or attitude that we're going to be relevant every day and every week, because we're in a pandemic. At the same time, it played out really well on how engaged a team worked together and really coordinated efforts, capturing some of the KOLs in that space, some of the oncologists more in tune, because maybe they weren't doing other things they had been doing prior, as their availability seemed to be there now. And I really do think that there was also an approach to get a deeper reach to doctors that maybe you wouldn't call on because they had very little volume. Again, in a rare disease, but we had more new prescribers during the second quarter than we ever did. Again, there's a lot of other things going on from, multimedia, digital, what the sales force does. But these are key things that are going on, just more patients coming on drug, as well as some physicians that had never written a drug in 3 years since launch, wrote for the first time. So you try to line those up. So what are the things that we've seen? And again, I was just really trying to find some deeper learnings around what we can do and share with everybody else on here. But those ones really stood out in that rare disease space. The captured audience of KOLs, as well as the patients who were more engaged. So I don't know if you wanted to add anything, Kevin.
Yeah, that's good stuff, Andy. Now I would add things from two different sides. One from a kind of a personal and personnel side, and then from the business side and the customer, patients, and provider side. I'll start with the personal and personnel. Interestingly, I transitioned from one biotech company to another during this pandemic. And so I've had an all virtual transition period. And you think about your team members and what they're going through when we're doing that kind of thing. It's really challenging to build relationships with people that you work with every day. So you've got to focus on that. And we've got to focus on that for our team members too when they're coming in. Understanding that people feel disconnected, they're working from their home offices and all of that. So I think there's been a lot of thought and focus around that, which is a good thing. From the business side, I'll talk about the patients and the providers. What does that mean? From the patients and provider side, because I left one biotech company and moved to another one, I've had now 3 specialty injectable products that I've had some, management over in various ways. And it's surprising to me how different those products are in terms of the way the patients and the providers perceive them. And so they're all specialty injectables, provider administered. You'd think they would be similar, but actually quite different. And I think it comes down to 2 things. What's the level of risk that the provider is willing to take? And what's the level of risk that the patient is willing to take? And that is the patient willing to take the risk of not having the medicine versus having it. And same for the provider. What level of risk are they willing to take? Does the patient need it in their estimation or not? And so we pull back from that and say, if you want to have an influence on how your product moves in the marketplace, you start to think about, okay, how do I address both of those things? How do I ensure that I'm communicating the value of the medicine in light of the pandemic. Does this offer something that the patients and providers need? And does it avoid some of the risks that the patients and providers are concerned about? And I've seen where one company did it very well with one brand and not as well with the other. And then another company that did it very differently, and all had different outcomes. I was just thinking about, Andy, what you said about the number of new providers coming on board. Been surprised to see that new providers do come on board when you address those issues, risk for patients and for the providers.
We taught you both, or several of you have talked about the challenges with administration of injectables and infusion in this period. Have you noticed any different effect in the pharmacy of injectables in the pharmacy space?
We have seen an increased utilization in physician-administered injectables in the pharmacy. If there's contracted pharmacy networks that are willing to administer injections, we have seen an increase in that occurrence as compared to coming into the physician's office. So that's something that has increased. So I think that the variety and the greater points of access to receive physician-administered alternate sites of care, integrated pharmacy networks, we've seen an increase in usage there.
Right. How about the sales offices? What type of opening up are you seeing? Are you seeing it sort of open in some cases, decline? What types of things are you seeing in the various types of offices that your sales reps are calling in?
I think for me, it's highly variable. So right now, 80%, 70 to 80% of our providers are not seeing sales representatives. And there's varying degrees of those that are willing to engage virtually, but it's actually quite higher than we would have thought. But it's variable. I mean, it depends upon the hotspots, it depends upon local restrictions, so on and so forth. So you may have a geography that's starting to open up a bit more and seeing representatives, and then the infection rate for COVID-19 increases and they shut down access again. So it's highly variable.
Yeah, I would agree with John. Variable is a good term.
County by county, in fact.
Yeah, exactly.
Town by town.
Yes. Are you seeing that even in the offices that are opening up, that's in some cases a lot of those doctors are still wanting to interact virtually?
Yeah, I think it's mixed. I do. I think as John had mentioned, particularly, for example, in psychiatry or other areas where they're more attuned to telemedicine, I think there's a mix between the interactions with telehealth, with sales representatives offline and in the office. I think another dynamic is samples around that. I think disease areas and products heavily dependent on samples and physicians. That's a huge dynamic around in office versus sort of online.
Yeah, certainly no shortage of change and requirement to be nimble. In light of all that magnitude of change, can you each of you talk a little bit about some of the strategies and tactics you're employing to address these changes?
I guess I'll start on this one. And, it's oftentimes, in the business, you can jump right to the business and the brands and the commercial operations, working with the medical team. But I think it's also super important to take a step back and really think about culture and how do we continue to maintain and invest in our culture, really infusing what is the purpose of the organization, what is our belief system, and really working to drive a level of employee engagement. I mean, these are unprecedented times, and I had somebody tell me once that everybody has a tremendous amount of anxiety, and anxiety is uncertainty times powerlessness, and there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty, and a lot of folks feel relatively powerless, and that's not just within work. That's having to virtually school their children. It's daycares maybe not being available. It's feeling relatively isolated because you can't go out like you typically would do. Your routines have been completely disrupted. I mean, there's a lot of uncertainty and powerlessness that breeds a tremendous amount of anxiety. So what we're learning is really focusing on, I think Kevin said it earlier, really making sure that you're intentional on the people piece, checking in with folks, leaning in and being empathetic, asking how people are doing, meeting them right where they are is critically important. And then also having enough consistent engagements from a team perspective, even virtually, so people stay connected from a relationship perspective. You know, any employee engagement survey oftentimes asks the question is, do you have a best friend or close friend at work? And that's a huge determinant of engagement. And when you get isolated for extended periods of time, it can break up and fracture those relationships. So finding ways to get people to convene is also critically important. But culture is one where I can't stress enough the importance of doubling down on culture, which to me breeds a level of resilience as we go through unprecedented times.
Yeah, I'll dovetail on that culture topic, John, because it was very interesting when, if you just take yourself back to that third week in March when this hit and everybody was told to stay home, and the first thing you think of is sales reps and sales teams and leaders of teams in the field, that this is a very uncomfortable thing for them. They don't go to an office. They don't engage in that way with cross-functionally that we all would maybe in a headquarters or an affiliate office. And so that was a big concern. And I do think that looking back at it, we did the right things from a standpoint of training. And I'll just pause there to say, if we didn't prepare that team right, they probably would have not been effective. But number two, I think they would have resented us for not helping them become effective in the new role. And what I mean by new role, new skill requirements. So one of the things that was, I know we spoke to, we're learning now on how to use these different platforms. And you mentioned it before, John, and you have Zoom, you have Cisco, WebEx, and you even have Microsoft Teams. They all have intricacies to them. So to just push them out to members that aren't usually using technology because they're used to being face-to-face and selling was something we really took a hard look at and how we wanted to do it and how we wanted to train it. So I think we're all there now, so I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I would revisit because it's going to stay variable the way we're going to work. And if this is one tool, we have to make sure that we, as an industry, make sure that it's really, really quality and how we execute on that. And you have to look back at not the person who's doing the work, but how we prepare them to get the job done with the tools. So that was one thing we did very, very well that I thought I'd share. And the other one was around the virtual selling skills themselves. So actually bringing on someone to teach and inform, what should you wear, right? What's your backdrop? Is it a blue shirt because you have a white wall behind you? How do you position the camera? How you're going to speak or use your tone of voice. There are little things, again, for people never doing this and they're relying on a sale in this way that they're going to work. It's critical. One of the other pieces we added into the mix was telemarketing. And I think it's something that we referred to 20 or 30 years ago when your phone rang at night and you couldn't put the phone down because somebody was selling you insurance or whatever it was, or even a phone cards or whatever it was. And in a way, you need to have skills to do telemarketing because people aren't working in that way. So now you have these devices and different platforms of technology to deliver messages. Now, how do you do it on the phone to get to someone to actually schedule something? So we had full day training, we had role playing, we had certification in the field on the platform utilization, but also the telemarketing. People appreciated it because it made them do it. And it has a skill set behind it. And how do you get into an office without being there? So a lot of that is a new way, telesolutions. And probably I don't want to underemphasize the reward and recognition that you should attach to these types of training, because it's kind of cumbersome for guys like, or people, anybody that isn't really excited around technology, doesn't use it all the time, and now they're using it as their livelihood, to at least bring some excitement to the team. And reward and recognize people who do it the best and share those practices. So I'll stop there. I just thought I would share that. Don't forget the fun factor, and I think it all comes together really well.
I will add a little bit of color to that as well, just around culture, because I do completely agree. Whoever can vehemently defend their culture and maintain it is going to accelerate quicker out of COVID. Just knowing that our employees and our peers, we have each other's backs is incredibly important in this time. But also around sort of accountability and productivity, I think is important. You know, you mentioned in March, everyone was at home, and I think everyone was working really hard, right, to make it work. And that sort of starts to wax and wane a bit as you move along, right, in the life cycle of COVID, working remotely, particularly for people such as in my group that aren't used to working at home, right? I think, John, you had mentioned you cover off a lot of decisions in the hallway. You know, now those are online, taking up more time, more space in the day. So activity is not necessarily always productivity, which I think is an important point. And teaching new skill sets to keep people engaged remotely is, I think, incredibly important as we move forward through and out of this pandemic. I think it's incredibly worthwhile to invest in that.
Here. All of those are excellent points. I would agree with everything, by the way. Good stuff. So one of the challenges that we found in my past company was that the environment in the marketplace really was upended by COVID. And we're talking about specialty injectable products. And you know, a big issue for us early on was access to providers in their practices. Not just for prescribing, but also for administering medication. And I know a few of you have touched on that before as well. From a managed markets perspective, we looked at that and saw that as a significant issue that we thought the payers would want to know about. And we realized that we had a field team that could help us really understand what was happening in the marketplace far better than our payer customers could. So from that managed market side, we saw ourselves as a resource and a partner, able to position ourselves very differently to the payers, rather than just, hey, we're asking for access. Now we're going in and saying, we can help you understand what's happening in the marketplace. I was surprised at how receptive the payers were to that. And I think it's probably true across any one of our customer bases. If we look at what's happening in the marketplace, can you pull back and say, what can I do, not just for this, you know, for the sake of our business, but for the good of the overall whole, as we're thinking about, you know, what we're doing during the pandemic period. So to me, that was one of the key strategies and tactics that we focused on that really made a big difference for us during the early part of the pandemic and as we move forward. I know we'll talk about it more as we go along, but understanding the skill sets, as all of you have mentioned, of our team members, how do we really make sure that they're doing the most and the best that they can in this virtual environment is another important focus on you know, improving our performance in the field.
What are you all doing relative to dialing up digital in this time period when face-to-face, especially with HCPs, isn't guaranteed? Can you share anything in that respect? Sort of the non-personal promotion space.
Yeah, I'm happy to kick that off, Sandy. I think the answer is it depends. It depends on the size of your company, the size of your brand, and the life cycle of your brand. I think digital makes a lot of sense for a lot of areas based on the life cycle of the brand, what awareness you need. But there's also a bit of a threshold with digital as well in terms of spend and share of voice that's necessary. So I think you really, probably the most practical piece of advice I could give around digital is really looking at your brands, looking at your products versus the share of voice you're going to need to make an impact in the market definition in which you're competing. And based on that analysis, really hone in on the one or two areas of digital that make sense for your brand in the context of the disease state. For example, Parkinson's disease. Kevin had talked about patients as well as John and Andy. A lot of adherence program around patients and disease state is working really well right now. In the migraine space, a lot of digital, big share of voice. There's big brands in that market. You need a lot of digital wherewithal to be able to compete in that space. So we're ramping up digital within, for example, the migraine space, epilepsy, a lot of adherence programs, right? Epilepsy, very serious disease state. People aren't missing their doses. So more digital messaging around adherence is important. So I think it depends on where you are and where you place your dollars in digital is important perspective.
Todd, one thing that you brought up during one of our preparation calls was also the importance of reaching out to these patient advocacy groups, especially in the rare disease space. But that's a very committed group that has a great pulse on the needs of these patients that are battling these diseases, and equipping them with information on disease state, any appropriate level of programming you can share, and just overall support is also really important during this period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Are you all doing anything differently with respect to development of materials? And obviously there's, we've had materials when we were face-to-face, particularly with HCPs. And when we first got started, we just sort of took those materials and presented them in a virtual environment. But are you getting to the point now where you're reimagining some of your materials so that they work more effectively in a more remote interaction situation?
Well, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, not necessarily reacting to just the materials question, but reacting to the messaging in this time. I think that it's useful to identify what the challenges are that the practice and the providers and the patients are facing, and adjust your messaging. And that trickles down into the materials that you're using, whether they're digital or hard copy, but addressing what the issues are, that are at the forefront of the minds of your customers. When you do that, you can sort of capitalize on what's happening in the environment. And failing to do that, I think, puts you at risk. So I would say it's all about evolving your messaging, all about evolving your materials, for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, actually,
really, go ahead.
Yeah,
Andy.
Sandy, I'll interject to that. We had the opportunity in the first week of COVID to actually say that, it's always tough to change your messaging. It's your messaging, right? Which is what your brand is. And you're early enough in the year too, but to Kevin's point, you adjust to what's going on. And we threw the line in around delivered right to your door, right? Because it's oral medication, it's rare disease. And we put on the website, put it everywhere you can, your materials, and it gave you a new way to deliver what you're already delivering, but this new tagline. And it had to resonate because, like I said, the result was in the pudding. We had tremendous sales. I mean, we broke records in the sense of new prescribers, new patient starts, all through COVID. And so there's many things that went on, but I do think that it was worthwhile to adjust and then, put that into your messaging as almost a tagline. And it was quickly, people needed something delivered to their home. They weren't going to get, treatment in their infusion center anymore. So this made them feel comfortable. And I think we saw the sales increase for that reason too. And again, very rare disease space. So little things like that do make a big difference. And then I think the cadence is what you were speaking to, as well as you don't want to keep sending the same email out from a rep to an email, or you don't want to send the same things out, or the same even deck you're going to deliver virtually. So you need to be able to work quickly and confidently to make sure that you've made some tweaks or changes so it looks different, but the message stays the same that you're trying to deliver. And I think those things were done very well by our organization, that I could see in a larger corporation. I would say maybe a little bit difficult to get everybody who's also working from home to get on those PRV calls or review meetings. But I think if you're all in and you're trying to stay relevant as a team, you do these things because it's what we do, right? And our business and patients need us to exist and continue to provide for them. So just a couple of things off the top of my head in relation to that.
Well, which really does beg the question, have you all made any changes in the way your teams are operating to be able to move more quickly, recognizing that change is coming at us, from every direction? You can't always anticipate it.
I think it's how we mine for insights. I mean, obviously, we always do typical, primary and secondary market research, but the insights that are often most powerful are from those that are closest to the customer. So I think the way we engage and listen to our field folks and understand what messages are resonating, which are not, the materials and resourcing that we're giving, which ones are sticky and gaining traction, which ones are not. So I think that ongoing dialogue with sales folks that are right out there on the front lines is critically important. And then take those key learnings and see if it's something that should be replicated and inform how we make the adjustments as we roll out resourcing.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier about the importance of acting on the insights that you gather from the field. But to John's point, the way that we've always functioned in now 2 organizations is that the field team has different elements, but there's a lot of partnership, collaboration, sort of state level and sometimes smaller operating teams that are coming from different functional areas but are working together. When we put those to action in the field and specifically focus them on understanding the impacts of COVID and the impacts on the patients and practices, we got a wealth of very rich information that came back. And that was the foundation for which we went to the payers to say, hey, this is what's happening. But in normal, regular day, everyday life, you've got to have partnerships in the field. But I think it was really, the importance was elevated during COVID, especially in the early days.
Yeah, no doubt the reliance of all of us working together is absolutely evident. And maybe it makes sense for us now to pivot towards talking about, what we see for the future. Obviously, it's really hard to know where we are in this pandemic journey, whether we're at the middle of the beginning or the beginning of the middle. It's really hard to know. But if you guys could share some thoughts around what you see looking forward, that would be great.
Yeah, I guess I'll speak to more of the sales function and how that looks moving forward. And I know everybody on this call is aware of, there's definitely been some downsizing of some bigger companies, some smaller companies since it started. And I do think it's going to, I don't want to say this is like, what do we do post-COVID? It's more about our business is now transformed because of what happened and what do we want to look like in the future? And it will be probably less reps, but doing different things. And I look at it as maybe 3.5 days of a given week of a 5-day work week or face-to-face calls. And maybe a day and a half is doing other things. And then, as leaders, we organize around what are those other things. That rep may also be more of a concierge, 2 different services that a company's offering. And they're delivering those in a different way than they would going to the office where they're the face-to-face audience. So I see it as it's going to change. There's no doubt about that. It will not be what it was. I mean, just as evidenced by practices changing to telehealth overnight and having, upwards of 59% of their ability to do telemedicine now. What does that tell you? That if they keep that in play, that's going to affect representatives going out into those offices because they won't be able to see them there. And so our counter will be things like that as well. So how do we engage them in the same way they do telemedicine? We can do that even better than we're doing today. And so that's one thing. What does that rep look like in the future? We'll need them. It'll just be in a different way. And we have to face the reality of it won't be what it was. One of the unique things that I experimented with that I wanted to share, because I couldn't believe I was going to do a virtual POA, but I did it in May out of a studio. And I'll give the plug to Cineos in Somerset, New Jersey. And literally, it was top notch. Saved a lot of money, not having to have people fly. And why I share this is in the future, we may do more meetings virtually. And once you do it, you need it to be organized by a vendor, in my opinion, a partner. And that's what we did at a studio. So everything was professionally handled. And for people like myself and John and Todd and people in the audience and Kevin, we show up and do our thing, right? So you're getting your message across, you're doing recognition, you're setting the tone. And it was one day, it even enabled us to do role plays and breakout rooms that we could quietly even observe from this studio, unbeknownst to people that were role playing in breakout rooms. And it was just amazing. So I would encourage to keep an open mind to the future of, boy, I really used to like to go to those meetings to kick off the year or two in some way or another. We still might not be out even in the spring of 21, right? So if that's the case, if you're waiting to do something, you're going to keep waiting. Look at these opportunities, but do it professionally, because it was a really good product for the audience. It was high energy, entertainment between breaks, and people even at their lunch break, you could send some food to their home and they can cook that up at lunchtime. I mean, it was just special for, again, building culture of a company and continue to keep morale high and motivated and delivering what you need to. So those are just two things around that I want to speak to the rep and how we can interact and drive them to drive top line sales more efficiently later on.
Yeah, Andy, we're doing the very same thing this fall, and to your point, having it professionally produced, having that production support, and having the breakout capabilities, recognition, inserting fun into it as well, and lightening things up a little bit. And we're excited about it. And I know I'm encouraged by listening to what you've experienced, is putting that into practice. And as you said, our meetings into the future, especially in the first quarter, the first half of next year, there's still going to be a lot of virtual interactions and engagements. So it's a chance to get it right and learn and continue to do more of it. The other piece is around engaging our customers. I think, if you think about it, we've had several advisory boards and they've been fantastic. We've had great attendance. Everybody's really leaning in, wonderful participation. It's a really good, convenient format. And I can see in the future physicians saying, why would I want to get on a plane and travel and take up that type of time when I could jump on a virtual call and provide the same type of input? So I think that virtual ad boards are something that's, we've done in the past to some extent, but typically they would be live. I can see that being more of a consistent norm moving forward in the future, which now your costs go down and you could probably do even more of them, which I think is a great way to engage our customers and gain insights through advisory boards, and then also facilitate that peer-to-peer interactions with each other as well.
Good stuff, John. Virtual is top of mind for me too. We all know that relationship building is critical in pharma, whether it's with providers or, in my case, with payers. And one of the biggest ways that we do that is the face-to-face interaction when we're visiting them in their offices, or oftentimes at major conferences, which are very important to managed care. That's where a lot of that good relationship building happens. This one-on-one sit-downs over a meal, or in group settings where we're learning together, educational sessions, and those really pay off. But as we've lost those because of COVID, we've lost that opportunity to build those relationships. And what I'm seeing people do now is they're really kind of running on fumes. They've been depending on the previous relationships that they've built to have those engagements, virtually, but we're not as adept at building those new relationships or expanding upon them. Given that, and given the need for our customers to learn more from us, as we move into the future, we really have to focus on how do we build relationships and how do we position ourselves in the minds of our customer in a better spot so that they see us as a valued partner. I think that's an important thing to do for post-COVID, and even honestly beyond post-COVID. I think we're going to be so much virtual in the future that that's got to be part of the way we do business.
Yeah, I think, moving forward, just from a practical perspective, and then sort of one of a strategic sense, is just around digital. I think company and product websites are going to become more dynamic and more important. Typically in smaller to mid pharma, even big pharma, websites can become pretty static and not that dynamic, but physicians and patients are becoming more digitally savvy. And websites can actually become an important hub or base for your sales force to sell around, for your CRM programs, customer B2B, and they're quick to pivot on versus building new tactics and trying to move them quickly through the process, so to speak, of MLR, et cetera. Websites can be much more dynamic and quicker. So just from a practical standpoint, but also, a lot of companies right now, and that's a key learning for me around websites, by the way, are playing digital catch up. And I think and continuing to run around digital. But I would also encourage to continue to look around and deep dive into all the channels of commercialization to try and advance them through COVID to the next step in terms of how we utilize them. Because I think companies that figure that out, in addition to digital, are going to be ahead of the curve. So I think that's an important perspective, you know, because, you know, just the fundamentals of commercialization around targets, message, differentiating message, and frequency. And frequency is what's hurting right now. So it's tough to get a lot of frequency on the same customer through digital, right? Just static banner ads and et cetera, and replacing that relationship we've talked about and the information gathered between a sales representative and an HCP is incredibly important. And the struggle is trying to figure out how to repeat that in this COVID world. So I think whoever figures that out quickly and does it the best is going to grow the fastest coming out of COVID.
Absolutely. You know, one of the forward-looking question debate that seems to be heating up now is this: go back to the office or continue to work remotely from home. You know, starting to see things in the news around the challenge of collaboration and innovation in a remote environment. I know we touched on this a little bit in the previous conversations, but any particular points of view on navigation of this potential return to the office, and particularly around how to really make sure that innovation and collaboration isn't lost during this period or diminished?
I think a lot of it has to, you know, depend on employee choice. So we can't put people in a situation where we take choice away, given their own personal set of circumstances. It could be concern of constricting the illness. It could be I'm immunocompromised. It could be I have an elderly person at home, whatever it may be. I have childcare needs. We have to be really mindful of where people are, but then also empower them with choice. And then as we do reopen, and we're in the process of reopening now, I think it becomes a natural progression, because folks that are coming back into the office, some feel like, you know, I'm just as productive as at home, but those that are coming into the office are realizing, and you almost get reminded of the benefits that was said earlier of those side hallway conversations, or walking from one meeting to the next. You cover off on a couple things that are now replaced with a 30-minute Teams or Zoom call. So there's a lot of additional efforts to get things done, especially kicking off new initiatives in a virtual environment as compared to when you're live. So I think there's natural benefit and gain. I think if you push it and rush it too quickly, it can compromise engagement with folks if they feel pressured. But I think just the appropriate encouragement with choice layered in, I personally feel is the best approach.
Yeah, John, I'd add to that. The movement back into the office, it's a lot of the home office people that were thinking about moving back into the home office, and getting back to regular live work environments. Having been a field-based, home office-based person for a long time, I've kind of lived through the challenges of Zoom calling in to you know, regular bricks and mortar type of meeting. And what the challenge there is that as a person zooming in, it's hard to kind of get a word in it edgewise, and you're not all considered. And so as we think about our team members that are moving back in, and some may be there and some are not there yet, I think it's going to be important for us to say, hey, we've got to run these meetings a little bit differently. Let's make sure that we pull in the people who are not physically with us in the office into the discussion so that their voices are heard and we gather the information that we're looking to gather. I think that's going to be critical, that we change the way we look at things moving forward.
That's a good point.
Yeah, so I think now we can transition to some of the questions that we've received from the participants. Apologies for not being able to get to all of them, but we're working through the ones that seem to be most common. I'll start off with one that was directed specifically to Andy, but obviously everyone is welcome to answer. Andy, you mentioned experiencing growth with some of your products. Can you provide a bit more detail on what drove the increase there?
Yeah, it's one product and it's in a very rare disease space. Like I said earlier, it's 12,000 patients. It was a hard sell. We had accelerated the brand a year ago, and then we had this hit, and we continued to accelerate. And I can tie the things back we did were clearly to the actions of what, we knew what COVID was going on. So it wasn't some of the things we were doing in the past. What we found was that, again, keeping the team in the mindset of being relevant. Like, we have to be relevant. We have only 12,000 patients out there potentially that could benefit from our medication. So how we're relevant is going to be how we find them, continue to find them. But because of the environment, literally every week we had a Facebook Live event. And a lot of these patients belong to these advocacy groups that participate in the Facebook Live events. And we'd have a KOL every week get on, and they had different topics. But we at least sponsored it and didn't control what they would say. But obviously someone was gonna ask a question about the medication, and it always happens. And it just really ended up being something that took off. We did every week throughout up until now. I mean, tremendous, and 150 people, another one would have 250 people on, 300 people. So again, knowing that this is what was what the patients wanted, and they were stuck at home, they were learning more than they normally would have learned. So that was one thing that we did very well. The other one was really having a sales force home and trying to engage through email and telemarketing, which was a new skill set trained, and trying to connect with. We put a lot behind, let's go deeper in our call plan, because we tend to focus on these, in rare disease, the doctors that have the most specialists, right, are here. But there's a whole bunch of other doctors. And they actually had time because they weren't able to be in the office treating patients. And as a result, and these were oncologists, and as a result, we were getting new engagements with them. And we saw month over month over month, March, April, May, June, and July. We had new prescribers that never ever wrote the brand, which has been on the market for 3 years. So it all ties back to the actions that you were doing were different. And once we started getting some of those on the hook, I think the sales team got excited about, like, we can get business right now. One of the other things we did really well was we created an incentive comp plan that tied them to the national attainment. So as I mentioned, we were growing. They were getting the benefit of that growth. So if you had a territory that was much lower because you were a New York City rep, you now had the ability to achieve whatever the company hit, which is going to be a lot better. No one expected that we would exceed 100% of the target. So that was second quarter, first quarter, second quarter. So you had a highly engaged team, well prepared, lots of communication, and people feeling good about what they're providing to patients that normally wouldn't have gotten that medication to help them. I hope that answers it somewhat. I tried to just boil it down to a couple key levers we pulled, but so it was pretty good.
Yeah, and certainly a lot of those things apply to outside of the rare disease space as well.
Yes.
Next question is really directed to anyone or everyone. Do you find that reps are worried about post-COVID job opportunities, and how are you addressing that?
Well, just what I've seen and I hear constantly is there's just a lot of concern about losing jobs still, because again, there has been word of larger companies making changes, and some did in the beginning, and there's still a lot more. So there is that discussion out there, and I think people are very concerned. But again, I love and I recommend to anyone is when you speak to keeping yourself relevant, that should enable you to make it through these tough times, meaning that, hey, I'm willing to learn new skills. I'm willing to work across 3 different platforms like I know them like the back of my hand when it comes to delivering a detail virtually. I know how to pick up a phone and get to a decision maker in an office that I never would have done this in the past. Those types of things, if people have the attitude they want to remain relevant, I think that we need those people to get through all this.
Yeah. I tend to agree. I mean, I think it's probably less about Salesforce reduction in size and more about how does our commercial model evolve, and what is kind of our go-to-market approach. So, somebody said earlier is a combination of, virtual activity plus live activity. Do we deploy differently? Our call points evolving? I think those are all elements that we need to evaluate, and I think that is going to evolve. It's probably be more about that than thinking simply reduction as we move forward.
Yeah.
I would kind of add to that. This general unease and concern among the field team, the sales teams, and the other field teams is very real, and it's out there and it's bubbling, and sometimes beneath the surface, and sometimes it pops up. I think it's important for us to try to dig in and kind of ferret out those concerns and address them. Lots of communication broadly to the team so that they understand where we stand as an organization. In both places that I've been in during COVID, there was no interest in downsizing or laying people off. And more often it was, we want to make sure we hold on to our people. And so ensuring that team members understood that was our perspective is critical, because if people are nervous, they start looking. And if they start looking, they start leaving. And that's the last thing you want in this kind of environment.
Yeah, I think a carryover to this conversation that's underway, there was a question directed to John. Can you give some examples of how you're engaging with the field team that has worked really well to keep people connected?
Yeah, we've had frequent, webinars. So within each one of our business units, led by our business unit head and our sales leaders, then I pull people together on a quarterly basis and do a large webinar, just kind of a state of affairs. How's the business? Reminding people of our overall purpose and the beliefs we are as an organization, and making yourself available just to have very open, honest, authentic Q&A, and hearing from leadership. We've gotten tremendous feedback that they've really appreciated it. They feel connected. Oftentimes, you do it at your big national meeting and you have a chance to engage with folks. Nothing will replace the benefit of, the breaks times, the coffee stations, all those side conversations are invaluable. So those are missed. But we do have an opportunity to throw ourselves out there even more. So instead of the 2 big field engagements a year, typically now you can do it with a greater cadence, and let people get to know who you are a little more, and then just be there to listen to their questions and to answer them to the best of your ability. But frequency is key. Just like with our customers, frequency with our people is hugely important.
Absolutely.
All about the people. And it looks like we might have just a few more minutes. I'll squeak in another question here. Have any of you seen the role of the MSL changing, or do you see the role of the MSL changing in the future? And are they getting more access?
I'll just make one comment on that. It was funny because once we rolled out all the training for the sales team, our medical heads went on the call and was blown away and said, I need to deliver this to our team. Can your trainer do this for my team? It's almost like an afterthought. We don't include them in these kind of things because they're in the same world we are right now. And they need to engage customers in the same way. They just do it in a different way. But it was very interesting up front that it was overlooked in a way that wasn't anybody going to work with the medical team. Like, are they aware that the world has changed and that we're using these platforms? And they didn't know how to put the blue shirt on with the white back either. They didn't know how to do some of these things and tricks, and they loved it. So that might be one more contributing factor, that we had them on board as well, talking to the same customers, at least when it comes to success. But I'll stop.
No, that's great. One last question to Kevin. What are the types of things that we should be talking to payers about at this point?
Yeah, so coming from my side of the world, the specialty injectable provider administered, it was important to talk to payers about what the landscape looked like in terms of how patients could access medicine. And that was quite spotty around the country, especially early in COVID. And payers are interested in this. They very much are interested and concerned about ensuring that patients get access to care. If they're being maintained on medication, they want to keep them on that medication. So being able to share that information about what's happening in the field and where the disruptions are has been really important. In the early days of COVID, they were removing all the barriers, pulling out all the stops so that patients could get access to medicine. And as time has gone on, they've kind of pulled those back again. So if we're seeing that that's disruptive or harming access to care, we need to bring that information forward to our payer customers.
Interesting.
Absolutely. Great. Well, we could probably, I'm sure we've just scratched the surface. We could go on all day, but we've used up an hour of your time. really wanted to thank you for joining us and hope that the conversation today has been insightful and perhaps thought-provoking in some way. Did want to let you know that in case it's helpful, Diligent will be compiling the discussion from today into an article that all of you here today will receive via email. And on behalf of Diligent, as well as all the panelists, we really want to thank you for joining us, and we wish you well on your way, and let's continue blazing this trail together. So have a great day, everyone. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Bye-bye.